There are moments on live television that stop you mid-scroll. Moments where the presenter in front of you isn't performing, isn't filling airtime. They're just being completely, uncomfortably human. What happened with Paul Sinha recently was exactly that kind of moment. And once you understand the full picture of what's been unfolding behind the scenes, it makes it hit even harder. Paul Sinha, known to millions across Britain as the Sinnerman from ITV's beloved quiz show The Chase, has long been one of those figures who occupies a very particular space in the national consciousness. He's sharp, he's witty, he's occasionally ruthless with contestants, and underneath all of that, he carries a story that's been both deeply personal and remarkably public. His appearances on Good Morning Britain have always carried weight, but his most recent one landed differently. This wasn't a promotional visit or a casual sofa chat. This felt like something closer to farewell, at least for now, and the emotion in the studio was impossible to miss. To understand why this moment resonated so deeply, you have to go back a few years. In 2019, Paul Sinha made a brave and very public announcement. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He was in his early 50s. He was at what many would consider the peak of his television career. And rather than retreating quietly or letting the story emerge on someone else's terms, he chose to speak about it openly and honestly. That decision earned him an enormous amount of respect, not just from fans of The Chase, but from the wider British public who tend to have a particular appreciation for authenticity, especially when someone has every reason to stay silent. Since that announcement, Paul has continued working. He's remained one of the chasers on the show, continued doing stand-up comedy, and has kept talking publicly about his experience with Parkinson's, including the realities of managing a degenerative neurological condition while maintaining a demanding career in television. It hasn't been straightforward. There have been periods where the physical toll has been evident to viewers watching closely. And there have been moments in interviews and on social platforms where Paul himself has been candid about the harder days. Good Morning Britain, for all its chaotic energy and occasionally combustible debates, has always been a space where those harder stories get told properly. The morning format, when it's working at its best, creates something unusual for television, an intimacy that prime time can rarely replicate. Viewers are often in dressing gowns, half awake, coffee in hand. The guard is down, and the conversations that happen in that atmosphere tend to land differently than they would in an evening magazine show or a late-night panel discussion. That context matters when you think about what unfolded during Paul Sinha's appearance. The segment began with what felt like a relatively standard format, catching up with a familiar face, discussing his work, touching on his life away from the quiz show set. But the conversation shifted, as these conversations often do on GMB, into something more personal and more searching. When the topic of his health came up, specifically where he is now with his Parkinson's diagnosis, how the condition has progressed, and what his relationship with his career looks like at this stage, Paul didn't deflect or offer a rehearsed update. He was open in a way that clearly caught even the presenters off guard. What made the exchange remarkable was not just what Paul said, but the visible emotional response in the studio. The presenters, who are accustomed to navigating emotional conversations on live television, were clearly moved. And Paul himself, a man who has built a reputation on quick wit and unshakable composure under pressure, allowed something quieter and more vulnerable to come through. The word farewell may be strong, and it's worth being clear that no formal retirement announcement has been made, but the tone of the conversation carried the weight of someone reflecting on a chapter, possibly preparing for change, and choosing to mark that in a public way. For long-term followers of Paul's journey, there was something both painful and profound about watching it. Painful because nobody wants to watch someone they admire reckon with the limits that illness can impose. Profound because the willingness to have that conversation, in front of cameras, in front of an audience of millions, takes a kind of courage that's easy to underestimate. The reaction from viewers watching at home and following along online was immediate and genuinely warm. Messages of support began circulating, with many people expressing gratitude for Paul's continued openness about his condition. There's a particular thread of audience response that keeps appearing in conversations about Paul Sinha, the sense that his honesty has helped other people living with Parkinson's themselves. People supporting loved ones with a condition. People who simply needed to see someone navigate difficulty with both realism and humor and find a way to keep going. That's not a small thing. From a broadcasting perspective, this is also a moment worth examining carefully. Good Morning Britain has had its share of controversy and headline-generating drama over the years. The show is no stranger to being talked about. But the moments that tend to define a program's legacy aren't the shouting matches or the political confrontations, as memorable as those can be. They're the moments of genuine human connection. The moments where a guest says something true in a setting that allows truth to land without ceremony. Paul Sinha's appearance was one of those moments, and ITV will be aware of that. There are questions that remain open, of course. The nature of Parkinson's means that the trajectory is uncertain for everyone living with the condition, but particularly for someone whose professional life involves the kind of sustained mental performance that television demands. Whether Paul continues appearing on The Chase in the same capacity, whether his broader television presence shifts, whether he chooses to redirect his energy toward advocacy or a different kind of public role, none of that has been formally settled. And it would be irresponsible to suggest otherwise. What can be said is that this moment on Good Morning Britain added another significant chapter to a story that has already been one of the more quietly important public narratives in British television over the past several years. Paul Sinha didn't ask to become a spokesperson for anything. He didn't frame his diagnosis as a campaign or a cause in the beginning. He simply told the truth about what was happening to him, and the public responded to that truth with something that has sustained him through difficult years. That relationship between a public figure and an audience that genuinely cares is rarer than television often pretends it is. For Good Morning Britain, the segment serves as a reminder of why the show still matters. In a media landscape that can feel increasingly fragmented and performative, a conversation that is simply real, honest, unscripted in an emotional sense, genuinely affecting, cuts through in a way that no amount of production value can manufacture. The presenters handled it with sensitivity. Paul handled it with the particular blend of dignity and directness that has come to define how he faces everything. And viewers were left with something that lingered well beyond the end of the segment. Whatever comes next for Paul Sinha, the support from the British public shows no sign of fading. If anything, moments like this one deepen it. There's a reason people keep showing up for him at his comedy shows, in front of the television when The Chase airs, in comment sections and message threads, and quiet conversations between friends. He's earned it, not through manufactured relatability, but through the straightforward act of being honest when honesty was harder than silence. That's where we are right now. A moment that felt like more than a television appearance. A goodbye that may not be a goodbye, but felt like one anyway. And a reminder that the stories that stay with us are almost never the ones that were planned. If this segment resonated with you, drop your thoughts in the comments below, whether you've been following Paul Sinha's journey for years, or this was the first you'd heard about what he's been going through. Your perspective matters. Give the video a like if you want to see more coverage of the real, human stories happening behind the scenes of British television. And subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because on Good Morning Britain, there's always another story just around the corner.